Okay, so in this video, I'm gonna talk about the two most common schools of thought about mental health. I'm gonna go into detail about what each side believes, who tends to fall into each side, and then I'm gonna talk about the middle ground, which is where we actually wanna be. Two opposing sides. They're always at war with each other. It's almost like each side recognizes the limitations of the other side. So we are living at a very specific point in history. People have a lot of privilege in the sense that they're not starving. Lots of people have reasonable jobs. They're married, they have families, they're not alone, they're not in this state where they're worried about their actual survival. So this upswing in mental illness, as we call it, is it directly correlates with this material stability. Now, I understand that not everyone has material stability. I'm not saying you're like rich and you have no worries. I'm saying compared to people in the 1800s and most of the 1900s, which was, full of war and, really major, the plagues, all of the illnesses and war of the past couple of centuries, most people do not deal with any of that in a very direct way. We may read the news and hear about wars, but usually most people are not having that happen to them. If you're watching this, if you're in, a fairly cushy apartment or home, or you have a great internet connection and you're able to even take the time out to watch something like this, that is indicative of you having a bit of privilege, a lot of privilege compared to people from the old days, right? Nobody in the year 1500 was worried about their mental health. Nobody in Jesus's time was concerned like, oh, I might have social anxiety. This is a result of our privilege. There is time and space for these issues of mental health to actually come up and be dealt with. Now, this is where the argument a lot of people get sucked into is this idea of being lucky, right? Like, oh, you're so privileged and lucky that you're even like I just said, like having the time to worry about your mental health. And what people will do, that is true. It is because you have extra time and space and whatever. We as a culture have that, at least in the Western world. But what people will do is they'll take that and they'll use that information to shame you. So this is how they get out of having to address the issue. So they'll say, because of all this privilege, you're really full of yourself. You're being self-indulgent by talking about your mental health or claiming that you have, you deserve sympathy or that you deserve anything, basically. It's hard to even understand this logic because it's not very logical. It's like, you should look back to how it used to be and be so grateful that you're not there that it should fix all of your mental health problems, which is not how any of this works. You still have your problems, even though they're not as big as the problems that other people used to have. So that whole realm of people who are like, mental health is not a thing, like if you're thinking about it, you're weak, that is their way of shaming you and feeling better about themselves. They're basically saying, I suppress all of my mental health issues, and the fact that I do makes me stronger and better than you. So that's one school of thought that is really a dead-end street that will never get anyone anywhere. If you know people who talk to you like that or talk to anyone like that, if they're open-minded, sure, you can probably try to change their mind, but generally people like that are not open-minded, and you just want to limit the amount of time you spend with those people, because they kind of shame other people in order to feel power. So they think that they're like, that's their only way of generating power, is by saying, you're struggling with depression? Well, people used to have it hard back in the day, so I'm strong, you're weak, I suppress everything. It doesn't mean that they don't have depression. That's what they don't understand. So that brings us to the point of suppression does not equal being cured. So people in this school of thought think that suppressing negative emotion makes them cured. The more I can avoid it and distract myself, the less it exists. So again, a very oversimplified thought process. It's basically them not wanting to critically think about this because it would just be too uncomfortable for them. Some people are so overwhelmed as it is with what's going on in their life. The idea that there's more to deal with, they won't have it, so they shut that down. Okay, so next I want to talk about other end of the spectrum. So people at the other end of the spectrum see these other people over here, and they look at that and they're like, those people are in denial, those people are suppressing. They can oftentimes see that, and they're like, I'm gonna be as far away from that as I can be. I'm gonna be opposite them because they're wrong, so the opposite must be right. These people tend to they're not ever addressing their issues. What they do is they hyper label themselves. So a lot of these people you see who tell you, like, I have depression, I have anxiety, I have BPD, I have ADHD, and they have all these disorders. But when they tell you about these things, something in you, if you've ever talked to one of these people, I know for me at least, something in me goes off like there's a red flag. There's something just not quite right about it. So they're not in denial. They're acknowledging something's going on. So that puts them, frankly, that puts them a little bit ahead of this group in terms of figuring out the problem, because they're saying, yes, something's going on here. They're at least able to like vocalize and talk about it and just admit that it's there. Now their big downfall, which usually just kind of gets them stuck forever if they're in this state really deeply, is they buy into every label they're given. They look up all these things, they identify with all the symptoms, right? They go down the list and they're checking the boxes like, that's me, I have this problem, I have this problem, I have all these problems. Which frankly, if anyone was honest, they could relate to a lot of these problems. Like even these people, if they were honest, they would relate to all these depression and anxiety symptoms you're reading on WebMD or whatever. But these people hyper identify. They almost think that it makes them unique. Like they think that other people aren't quite dealing with it like they are. And they think, sometimes they think they're the only ones dealing with it. Like me and everyone else who has, what's an example? Agoraphobia, for example. Or me and everyone else who has bipolar disorder. We are the only ones who deal with X, Y, and Z. We're the only ones who get it. And it's because of bipolar, or like, you know, whatever the disorder or disease is. Because of that, I can't do anything, essentially. Like, I can't work a normal job. I can't ever get better because I've heard people say this. I've heard people say that their therapist told them that they would never get better. So that, again, big red flag there. When someone's telling you that you have an illness and it's not physical, it's purely mental, but it can't get better, that's a red flag that you might want to distance yourself from that person, because I mean they've given up on you is essentially what that means. And that's unfortunate that someone has that little hope about reality to say that, you know, you have depression, you will battle this forever. That's what most people are told about depression, addiction. I've heard people with addictions told, you will battle this forever. And I know a lot of people who are addicts, and I've seen some of them battle it forever, and I've seen some of them leave it behind them permanently. Not to say that there's no such thing as like a bad day, or you might have like a trigger or something here and there, but generally, I have seen people leave things behind completely and battle it forever. If you're buying into the label so deeply that your whole entire life starts to be framed around this idea of your sickness, we have people like Sigmund Freud, who came up with the DSM. He organized all of this information. He basically grouped sets of symptoms together and came up with names for the disorders. So let's say we have all these people, and they're all hallucinating. They're all getting paranoid, and they fail to function. So they fail to work at jobs or hold down relationships because of their hallucinations and paranoia and this stuff. So he has a set of criteria. He names this schizophrenia, for example. So now every time someone walks in with these set of symptoms, they get labeled schizophrenic. They're often given a certain pill. It's great to have this information instead of not having any information. But ultimately, what is missing here with these symptoms and these groupings is an understanding of the root issue. Where is all this coming from? This is always skipped over because we don't really know. This is all where the subconscious comes in. So we say like, okay, people with schizophrenia, they have these symptoms. This is what other people have experienced with these sets of treatments. We have all this information to try to make up for the fact that we don't understand the root of why this is happening. We don't understand why people have schizophrenia, right? So we're doing this with each issue. So depression, anxiety, any issue, jam-packing as much information as we can into our brains and giving patients as much as we know without knowing the truth. So the truth being, the reason that you're having the issues you're having are particular to you. They have to do with subconscious information that you don't interact with on a daily basis because it's uncomfortable and because you haven't been taught that it's right or good to do so. Now, especially if you identify at all, or if you come from a family who is in the suppressor camp, so the first group we talked about, who really likes to sweep things under the rug and prefers that, you are going to be really resistant to figuring out the root reasons and doing things like shadow work and doing things like meditating when you're feeling really bad. Anything that's going to get you interacting with subconscious material that's actually going to tell you what's going on, why you have these mental illness symptoms, you're going to be extremely resistant to doing those things. Now, if you are in the indulgers camp, so these people who hyper-identify and they believe they'll never get better, the reason these people don't like to do things like shadow work and understanding what's going on with them individually is because of the responsibility. That is what scares them. The responsibility that, holy shit, if all of this is really something that's within my control, then they're automatically going to be tempted to blame themselves. If all of this is in my control and I have a say in whether I get better or worse, that's a whole lot of responsibility. And for someone who's already feeling like shit, it's very easy to slip deeply into shame and blaming yourself for that. So they're kind of trying to avoid feeling even worse, essentially, like feeling all this blame of, oh my gosh, I have to take responsibility now, and I don't even get empathy from other people for having these problems. Now I have to figure it all out alone too. It's not necessarily, it doesn't sound like a lot of fun, right? It sounds like a really sucky reality to have to wake up to. So this is why the people in this camp kind of resist this shadow work, self-empowerment, like you control your reality. Some of them really don't like that because it feels like blame. It feels like victim blaming. That's what it is. These people think that when you say things like you control your reality, they immediately jump to the idea that you must be blaming me for my problems. You must be shaming me for them. We already have enough of that coming from this group who are yelling at us, right? So they're like, no, I'm not taking responsibility. You can go F yourself. So ultimately, though, it doesn't have to be an insult to say, that's why there's a big saying right now that's, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Because that puts you right in the center where I'm talking about us having to come to. So each side coming to this center that, no, it's not my fault, but yes, it is my responsibility. And that's where we can start to move. So we're gonna just kind of list out some like classic traits of each school of thought. Okay, so something really interesting that just happened. So I picked the colors red and blue kind of at random, like I kind of just intuitively picked them. But the more I'm thinking about this topic and this polarization, the more I'm realizing that most of the people I've met that fall into the indulgers camp are Democrats, and most of the people in the suppressors camp that I've met are Republicans. This could just be my experience, but I kind of think there's a pattern going on here with these two ideologies, right? Because these are the two main ideologies that run America, right? That run the United States. So starting with the indulgers, they like labels, or they're okay with labels at least. They believe that labels are scientific and they can help people better understand themselves and get the help that they need, which is in some cases true, but not always. Suppressors tend to dislike labels. They sometimes even distrust that the science behind labels are even accurate. Sometimes they will sort of write that off as gibberish. So indulgers believe the environment should suit the individual. So they believe in making accommodations, just kind of encouraging everyone to be individuals, which again is good on the surface as long as it's not taken too far to where the individual is sort of just being unruly and trying to mold the outside reality to everything that they need so that they don't have to grow. Suppressors believe the individual should conform to the environment. This is sort of the downfall of the suppressor, is believing that this old model of everyone having to do what they're told is how we're going to avoid problems. The indulgers can slip into this idea that I can't change my illness. Again, leaning back on the label, leaning back on this is what I was told and experts know, we should trust the experts. Suppressors will just say, I don't have an illness, which on the surface can seem like empowerment, right? It's kind of like, it's a little bit like my argument saying that it's not an illness that you have, but they take it to the extreme where they won't address their problems at all. So they're basically saying, I don't have an illness, I don't have a problem. It's just complete writing it off. So suppressors deny and they shame others who are not doing the same as them. They look at indulgers and they say, you should be strong like me. Indulgers, on the other hand, can easily slip into playing the victim just because they've been a victim of something, they will kind of latch onto that and make it their whole story. They're also more likely to blame the idea of a chemical imbalance in a way where it actually disempowers them. Because if you believe you have a chemical imbalance, you can actually look at that in a way where you're completely powerless. In reality, we can look at a chemical imbalance as just another symptom of the root problem. While suppressors avoid their true feelings, indulgers avoid taking responsibility